What's up, hockey fans? Welcome to the Wraparound, brought to you by the Hockey News. I'm your host, Emma Lingan. I'm joined today by Michael Augello and Jim Parsons of the Hockey News. We're coming at you as we do every Tuesday and Thursday to talk about the latest and greatest storylines from around the NHL in bite-sized portions. But before we get into all of that today, do want to remind you that for over 75 years, the Hockey News has been the ultimate hockey fix. Now get 12 issues delivered straight to you, packed with stories, stats, and a bonus gift issue to kick things off. Head over to thn.com and get in on the action. All right, you guys, want to start off this week with Mika Zibanejad. Had a full circle moment this week. He played in his 1000th game in the NHL on Monday against the Ottawa Senators, which was the team that drafted him 6 overall all the way back in 2011. Zibanejad, of course, now with the Rangers. He spent 10 of his 14 seasons with the Rangers. He scored the most points for the franchise since joining them in the 2015-2016 season. So obviously, as we've talked about at length on the show before, things haven't actually gone according to plan for the Rangers this season, or last season for that matter. But Mike, when you look at Zibanejad and everything he's accomplished, do you see him being part of the team's long-term solution? I mean, we've already seen them ship out Artemi Panarin. Do you think Zibanejad could be next? Where do you see him kind of fitting into their long-term plan?
Well, he may not fit into their long-term plan, but the problem is he has a no-move clause, so they're going to have to continue to plan on him being part of the long-term plan. He's 32 years old. He's had sort of a comeback season this year with 30 goals. You know, he didn't have a really great season last year, and all we heard all last summer was that they were going to try to like cajole him or force him to waive his no-move clause. Well, that doesn't work, and agents and some players basically they get these no move clauses because they want to stay in the place that they're at, and he wants to stay in New York. So they're really powerless unless they're going to buy him out, and he's got a lot of term left on his contract. So they may trade Adam Fox, they may trade Shesterkin, they may go completely tear down rebuild. But in the end, the only thing standing is going to be Mika Zibanejad if he still wants to be in New York.
Yeah, Jim, things have not gone well for the Rangers really the last couple of seasons. And I mean, do you think that Zibanejad would want to stay in New York as a result of that? How do you kind of see this shaping out with him and his future with that team?
I suppose this probably depends on two different factors, right? How much do players want to play in New York as a city, as a franchise, and how many players want to play on a winning team? Depending on how he looks at this, might determine his future, right? Like if the Rangers are moving out a bunch of pieces and they are going retool, rebuild, and they might have done one of the fastest rebuilds in modern history for the last little bit here, but it's probably not going to pull that off twice. So if you're going to be the Rangers organization and you're moving guys like Adam Fox and Trocheck and other players like that, Zibanejad's going to have to take a look at this and go, do I really want to be a part of this anymore? Yeah, it's great to play in New York, and yeah, I wanted to be here, but do I really still want to be here if this is what we're looking at over the next however many years? And when you consider his age, where he's at, his timeline window with their timeline window, which is probably going to be, 3 or 4 years before they're any good again, he's going to have to decide, what do I want to do here? Is this something that I want to ride out and know that we're not going to be competitive and I'm just staying here because it's New York? Or is it one of those things where it's like, no, I want a chance to win. I'm 32. And I've got a contract that might be attractive to other people while it might not work in New York. So I do see him potentially being one of those players who pivots, where he could say, you know what, I did want to be in New York, but the way that things are going, maybe I don't. Maybe I'm going to relook at this. And the Rangers might not have to pull too hard to convince him that this is not the way to go, all depending on what happens here in the next little bit with other players.
Yeah, definitely a lot of reflection, self-reflection on the horizon for guys like Mika Zibanejad with the Rangers heading toward this rebuild. But big milestone for him, 1,000 games. Another big milestone coming up here is Florida Panthers head coach Paul Maurice. He is set to coach his 2,000th game this week, joins Scotty Bowman, just the only other coach to reach that milestone in the NHL. So he is now on pace to surpass Bowman in the 2027-28 season if he continues coaching. Mike, with coaching stops in places like Hartford/Carolina, Toronto, Winnipeg, now Florida, when you look at Paul Maurice's legacy, as a coach. How do you view it, and what do you think, what do you think of all of his accomplishments up to this date?
Well, up to the time that he won a Stanley Cup, he was looked upon as a good coach, but more of a compiler. Look at all the stops that he made. He had some success in Carolina, but never really in Winnipeg as well, but never really, got to that level of Scotty Bowman where he got to a cup final and won. And finally he did with Florida and consecutive Stanley Cups. So I think obviously the 2 Stanley Cups have bolstered his legacy to one of the best coaches. But had he not won those Stanley Cups, I'll use another sport analogy, he'd be sort of the Marty Schottenheimer of the NHL, meaning, he had great success in the regular season. He had some success in the playoffs, could never get over the hump. And now he has, and I think now he's going to be in that pantheon with Bowman, with Joel Quenneville, and a few others.
Yeah, hard to take the Stanley Cups out of the equation, of course, but like you said, kind of a journeyman up until he got to Florida. Jim, when Maurice's legacy is, or when his career is all said and done, what do you think of his legacy as a coach with or without the Stanley Cups?
Well, you can't deny the numbers, right? Like, he's right up there in terms of how many wins and how many games and how long he's been in the game and what he's done. One of the things that's most interesting for me when it comes to Maurice is the way that he's kind of navigated his own career. The thing I remember maybe most about him was that he pulled himself out of Winnipeg. It was one of those situations where he said, you know what, this is not a fit anymore, and I can see it. And he just up and quit. And it was one of those things where he didn't lose his job in Winnipeg. He left his job in Winnipeg, and he decided to try something different. And when you're in that situation and you're a player or a coach like that, and you can go, you know what, I don't see this working, and I have enough confidence in myself and what I've built as a resume at that point, and that was before the Stanley Cups, that you could just say, you know what, I'm going to move on. I'm going to try something else. And it worked. And he went on to Florida, and he's coaching some really heavy names in that organization and some star players. And he's got this reputation for being a player's kind of coach, but he's also hard at times. And that was what really an interesting pivot for me in his career, because, that was a pretty good team with some pretty good players on it. And he just up and left. He just felt like, you know what, I don't think this is a mesh anymore, and I'm going to move on and let them do their own thing. And he was highly complimentary of that organization when he did leave. And he moved on to Florida, and look what he's done there. So you can't deny the numbers, but the way he's navigated his own career is probably the most interesting part of his storyline for me.
Yeah, that self-awareness and the ability to bet on yourself. I think confidence is huge in his kind of career arc there. Sticking with the coaching conversation here, Mike, want to pivot to your neck of the woods up in Buffalo, because Lindy Ruff, currently the heavy favorite to win the Jack Adams Award at -400 odds at BetMGM. So Ruff, of course, in his second season as head coach with the Sabres, previously coached for 15 seasons after joining in 1997-98. This time around, the Sabres are set to break their 14-year playoff drought under Ruff's leadership. So, Mike, from your perspective, what do you think has been the biggest reason that Ruff has been able to find success with the Sabres this year after they've been missing the playoffs for so many years?
I don't know. It's bizarre, because remember, on December the 9th, this team was last in the Eastern Conference. And since then, I think the record is 33-6-3, which has been the best over 40 game stretch since the 95-96 Detroit Red Wings under Scotty Bowman. So that would lead you to believe that this is not a blip, that this is like something that Lindy Ruff did. And I think, he has coached to the team's strengths, which is speed and offensive creativity. He did that coming out of the lockout in 06 and 07, and those teams got to consecutive Eastern Conference finals. I think he did that, but it's weird that last year, with pretty much the same group, he couldn't sort of implement that, couldn't put that into action. And at the beginning of this year, the same thing. I don't think they magically learned how to play good hockey once they fired Kevin Adams. But Ruff, he teaches structure. He teaches. I think he makes the players accountable. But as for why things just clicked in the middle of December and they've become this juggernaut, I can't tell you, and I'm sure he could tell me better, but I don't know.
That's hockey sometimes. You expect the unexpected a little bit. Jim, from your outside point of view, anything that sticks out to you about this Buffalo team and the way that they're coached that could speak to maybe why they've taken this turnaround under Ruff at this point in the season?
Yeah, I'm with Michael. I'm not sure exactly what the formula or the recipe for success is in Buffalo and what's going on there that all of a sudden they've just sort of turned a full 180 and they're going in a positive direction. I mean, this is the same group that not that long ago was the worst in the NHL, basically, and they just couldn't, for however many seasons, couldn't figure it out, right? GM wasn't working, coaches weren't working. There was nothing there that just clicked. But now it's clicking for whatever reason. Ruff back there for a second time, the same players, but thinking differently. I think maybe there's just some maturity here. I think maturity is part of the coach, maturity is part of the players. I remember last season, I think it was last season, that Buffalo got a lot of the treatment that Toronto's getting now, where it was kind of like, hey, we didn't stand up for each other. We weren't going to bat for our players. And there was a lot of like controversy in Buffalo as far as how they viewed themselves as teammates and as players. I think there's some maturity on both ends here. I think the second time around with Ruff, it's been a better go. I think in Buffalo, the players are starting to figure it out and realizing it. And you know what? Hey, we have to play a certain way, a certain style, but to be there for each other. I think all those things just coming together is the only thing that I can put together and say, you know, that's what's working here, because the recipes or the pieces of the puzzle are kind of the same. So, yeah, my guess is it's probably just a matter of timing.
I mean, Jim makes a good point. I just reiterate what he was saying about the reaction to the Tage Thompson incident from last year and how that sort of mimics what happened with Toronto with Austin Matthews. But it didn't really have a positive effect in terms of after that for the rest of the season. And this year at the beginning, it didn't really have seem to have a positive effect, but you saw how they rallied against for each other in that game against Tampa Bay. So apparently they got the message that they have to, that there has to be team toughness and they have to stick up for each other. And I think that sort of esprit de corps that the team has now is definitely helpful. But whether that was Ruff implementing that or the players deciding that's what we have to do, I don't know. That's why I'm saying what is going on right now. Lindy Ruff is going to win the Jack Adams. What they have done is incredible. I just don't know how much he had to do with the turnaround this team has had.
Sometimes it is. Like Jim said, timing is everything. And the timing is what it may come down to here in the East for the playoff race in terms of who gets hot at what time, because it's still pretty tight here in the East. One of those teams competing for a playoff spot is the Montreal Canadiens. And big part of that is Cole Caufield. He picked up a hat trick as part of a 5-point night against the Islanders on Saturday. He's now got 43 goals and 74 points in 68 games. He's also just 2 goals away from tying Nathan MacKinnon for the league lead through the same amount of games played. So that's a pretty good place to be if you're Cole Caufield. So Mike, what do you think of this season from Caufield overall? Obviously, we talked about him in the context of maybe he should have been an addition to the U.S. Olympic team, and he was notably left off that team. But do you think he'll end up maybe even sneaking into a Rocket Richard Trophy conversation with this late season push?
He very well could. I mean, that group, that top end group that they have with Slafkovsky and Suzuki and Caufield and Demidov and Lane Hudson, obviously. It's one of the best in the NHL in terms of their speed and their offensive abilities. The problem is there's not a ton after that. And there's questions about their goaltending. For all the success the Canadians have had this year, they're only a point out of missing the playoffs. They have 86 points, and the Bruins have 86, and the Islanders have 85, and then you got Detroit and Ottawa right behind them. So for all the success, and Caufield is probably going to score 50 goals. He's one of the best snipers in the league, and should be a cautionary tale to any team who decides they're not going to draft a player who's 5'9". You draft a player who's the best and most skilled player, and he is one of the most skilled players in this league. So, but I mean, for all that success, I mean, they could conceivably miss the playoffs. And what's going to happen is Montreal is going to have to continue to depend on Caufield and that group that I mentioned to get them over the hump.
Yeah, Caufield's going to be a necessary piece for Montreal to make any kind of noise in the playoffs or even just down the stretch here. But Jim, what do you think of this season from him overall? Do you think he makes it into that Rocket Richard conversation, or do you think it's McKinnon's to lose?
Yeah, he'll make it in the conversation, but I don't see him winning it. I think McKinnon is probably going to be the guy who gets there. And the one major factor for me is I think because Cole Caufield has gotten very hot and his shooting percentage is around 20% right now, whereas McKinnon's doing what he's doing at around 10. So it's one of those things where if Caufield doesn't stay like super hot for the last however many games, 11 games here for Montreal, he's got to go on a tear to catch McKinnon. And McKinnon would have to, at the same time, slow down. It's kind of like teams catching others in the standings, right? It's not just about whether you win. It's about whether they lose. So McKinnon's got to drop off while Caufield's got to get hot. So I think he'll be in the conversation. I don't think he's going to win it. I think it's probably McKinnon's to win this season just based on everything that I'm seeing with Colorado and how offensively potent they are and how he's been steady all year. But he's in the conversation now. This is a season where we're showing that Caufield is a 40 to 50 goal guy, and he could be moving forward. So whether he's in the conversation this year or he eventually wins it, I think that is a possibility in the next season or two, that if Caufield has figured this out and he is doing what he's doing and he can consistently do it next season, I think he's probably more in the conversation in the next year or two. But I'm going with McKinnon this year.
That's probably a pretty safe bet. Jim, since we have you here today, we've got to ask you about Connor McDavid. He had some intriguing comments over the weekend about John Cooper and the Tampa Bay Lightning. He said, quote, "They've got a great system. They're perfectly coached. They all know what they're doing all over the ice. It's impressive. Obviously, we've been playing together a long time, and we feel like we're somewhat rehearsed and organized, but not to their level." So then he was asked the next day if his comments about Tampa and about Cooper had anything to do with his own coaching staff in Edmonton. So McDavid responded, "We're not taking shots. It's just everybody can be better, myself included. Everybody can be better. It was more of a complimentary of a great team in this league that came in and played a good game. Nothing more than that." So based on those comments and the way this all unfolded, I mean, it was a pretty diplomatic response from McDavid. But Jim, do you think any of McDavid's comments maybe did have a little bit of a deeper meaning, sort of taking jabs at his own coaching staff in Edmonton? Do you think there might be any tension between the players and the coaching staff just based on your experience covering the team?
Yeah, it's a tough one because that response from McDavid came kind of unprompted. He was asked about Nikita Kucherov and the 4 points that he had that night. And that was the answer he gave instead of really talking about Kucherov. It was kind of like how perfectly coached the Tampa Bay Lightning are. Now, keep in mind, we should go back to his history with John Cooper, right? The Olympics and Four Nations. So he knows, and he's getting to know this coach really well. So when you have a team like Tampa Bay who comes in and beats you pretty handily, 5-2, and you look at how they run that system, and then you look at the frustrations and struggles going on in Edmonton, which has been kind of consistent all season. 2 steps forward, 2 steps back. It's just been that way all year. I can understand why McDavid is frustrated. What really caught people off guard was the unprompted answer that he just sort of pivoted on his own, and he doubled down and he did it twice in the same interview. So that was what really kind of got people surprised. We all looked around at each other like, what's going on here? Like, why is he talking about this? And so when we talked to Knobloch after the game and we mentioned the comments, Knobloch paused for quite a while before he was like, how do I answer this? And so he said, you know what, I think it's fine. The communication and the organization and the systems are fine. There is definitely, I will say this, these are coaches and players who I don't think are on the same page. I see Knobloch seeing the game in a different way than I think the Stars do. And this is now the second star, McDavid and Draisaitl, just before the Olympic break, where he also made a comment at coaching. So I think the Stars see a different thing going on in Edmonton. And I think the coaches see a different thing going on in Edmonton, to the point where Paul Coffey was brought in this year to change things up. So my take is that there probably needs to be at some point on this road trip, kind of let's have it out on the table moment in Edmonton, where everybody gets together and says, you know what, those comments probably weren't meant to be a shot. And he's probably telling the truth. I wasn't taking a jab at Knobloch. I think that's probably true. But I think now that it's out there and there are questions in the past about the coaching and questions about how the Stars see the team and how they're not as good as this season as they were last, they do got to get this out on the table. They just got to air out all their grievances and kind of talk about this, and so they can move forward together as a group, because this is the group. I don't see Knobloch going anywhere. Something would really have to happen for Knobloch to lose his job this season. It's possible, but I don't see it. So it's one of those things where I think you just need to get it out there, air it all out on the table while you're on the road in a conference room or at a restaurant or something like that and say, okay, we said it. Here's what we're thinking. Let's move forward. But I get the sense there is some frustration here. And how can there not be? This team has not been very good. They've struggled a lot this season. They are only in the Pacific Division or in the race they're in because the Pacific Division is so bad. McDavid called it a pillow fight of a division. So there's a lot going on here in Edmonton that I think they're kind of not real happy about. So I think they're on the same page. Do I think it was directly a shot at Knobloch? No, I think it was probably first a compliment of John Cooper. But when you get the whole pieces all put together, I can understand why this was taken out of context and why McDavid had to kind of walk it back on Monday. So it's interesting. There's a lot going on here in Edmonton, and I don't think everybody's real happy right now. But I don't think he was directly trying to insult Chris Knobloch.
Yeah, understandable that everyone might not be too happy in Edmonton right now. Mike, it seems like every week on here we've got something to talk about with the Oilers, and it's usually not something good. Well, on that uplifting note, let's shift gears over. I want to look at Boston. The Bruins this week agreed to an AHL tryout agreement with their 7th overall pick from 2025, James Hagens, for the remainder of the season. So Hagens had 23 goals, 47 points in 34 games this year with Boston College. He led Hockey East in scoring. So he has not yet signed his entry-level contract with the Bruins, which leaves the door open for him to potentially return to college next season. So he signed the AHL tryout agreement to sort of circumvent that process. But based on the outlook for the Bruins roster, Mike, do you think that they will bring Hagens into the NHL this season or send him back to college? And how much of, his performance at the AHL level for the remainder of this season is going to dictate that?
I wonder if this is up to Hagens more than it's up to the Bruins, because if he decides he wants to go back to college, there is the NIL factor in terms of him being able to make money and go to someplace other than Boston College using the transfer portal. And he could make money like Gavin McKenna is making at Penn State or other players are making. So that might be a factor. I mean, if the Bruins say you're going to be in the NHL and you're going to be making your entry-level contract, then okay, then he probably signs the entry-level deal. But there's no rush here. He's 19 years old. So I think that, they give him a look. They let him play against adults in the American Hockey League. They see how far along is he. And if he lights it up in a few games, then they probably say, hey, you're going to step in with the Bruins and you could be part of our playoff roster. And then I think a deal gets signed. But I have a feeling that essentially this is hedging his bets, seeing where things are. And then if not, he can go back to college, make a little extra pocket change, and then sign next year.
Yeah, it's interesting landscape right now, of course, with NIL and the NCAA. And at this point, Jim, we've seen obviously what Hagens can do at the collegiate level. Now he's going to go to Providence and, like Mike said, play against men, see what he can do at the AHL level. So what do you think the Bruins end up doing with him next year? And do you agree that it's maybe more up to him than it is to the team?
Yeah, the NIL stuff has really changed everything. When you look at the college prospects coming in before, they could kind of choose which team they liked the most, but they didn't have the option of making any money. Now they do. So it's not as huge a pressure situation to get into the NHL like it used to be. But for Boston, I think Hagens is just too good to be in a college situation or in the AHL. I think he'll go down and play a couple of games. Wouldn't shock me at all if he signs his entry-level deal in the next few days here. Like that is one of those things where I can see that happening. I think Boston probably wants that. I think they have a situation where he could seamlessly fit in to their roster. When you've got, I think Fraser Minton's coming into Toronto and playing as the top line center. Like when you've got that going on in Boston, you've got room for him to come in and play and get an opportunity and play well. So I think Boston probably is looking at this going, you know what? Yeah, we'll give him some time. We'll get him down there a couple games. We're going to work on this entry-level deal with him, see if we can get it signed. And then they have probably plans for him to play, if not this season, definitely next season. But I agree with Michael. I think it's kind of up to him if he wants to or not, right? Because he could go back, make some money. He could, take his options and see what is on the table in other places. He's got choices, right, that some of these college players didn't have before. So I think Boston wants to bring him in. I think he's probably too good not to get an NHL look. I think also because of the slide rule with the entry-level deals and his age, that plays a factor into all of this. So, I see him being a big part of Boston's future next season.
Yep, definitely. Whether it's next season or beyond, I think James Hagens is going to be a big part of the Boston Bruins' future here. Similarly, a young player who is currently playing in the league right now, big piece of the present and the future for the Dallas Stars, and that's Wyatt Johnston. He set the Dallas Stars power play goals record this past weekend. He's got 23 this season. So he's just 23 years old, has already set career highs in goals and points this season. He's second on the Stars in scoring. He's got 38 goals, 75 points. Mike, again, looking at his age, I mean, Johnston is just 23 years old, so his ceiling is obviously very high. How high do you think it is? Do you think that he eventually becomes a 100-point player?
Yeah, he's not even in his prime yet, at 23. And I think it has less to do with him than it has to do with who the Dallas Stars surround him with. For example, if they end up trading Jason Robertson this year, 1 year before he becomes an unrestricted free agent, I mean, you have to have wingers to play with your center to be able to get to 100 points. I think, right now, if you look at his last 3 years, he scored 30 goals each year. His goal total has gone up. His assists are basically at the same level as his goals. If he's going to get to 100 points, he's probably going to have 40 to 45 goals and 55 assists. Then to have 55 assists, you have to have a sniper playing on one of your wings. And unless he's playing with Mikko Rantanen, then Robertson is the next level. And if Robertson goes someplace else, then I don't know if he'll have the capability of getting 100 points. He's going to be an 80 to 85 point center every year. And, he's an incredible talent. But I think to get to that 100-point plateau, he's going to need wingers who can put the puck in the net.
Well, and that's a good point you bring up. We know the Stars would like to figure out a way to keep Jason Robertson for the long term. The cap math has to work though. And I think, when you look at Jim Nill, obviously has been GM of the year a couple times and has been able to construct this team very well. Now, Jim, when you look at what Johnston is doing right now, how much pressure do you think that puts on Jim Nill and the Dallas Stars front office to really focus on keeping those pieces and building a team around him?
I think they want to keep Jason Robertson. I also think if he leaves, they'll find somebody else. This is the Dallas Stars. This is a very attractive place to play. This is a state-free tax. Players want to go there. And if you're losing Jason Robertson, it's because you think you probably have a target somewhere else or a player that you can bring coming in. You don't just let Jason Robertson walk away. So I think this is a situation where if he doesn't stay, they probably have their eyes on somebody else who they think is as good or close to as good. And they're just moving pieces around a little bit. As far as Wyatt Johnston goes, though, I believe he's going to be a 100-point player. It's just a matter of when. This is a guy who every season, I think he went from 24 to 33, and now he's going to be somewhere around 45. Like, his goal total just keeps going up and going up and going up. And like Michael said, he's not even in his prime yet. And the Dallas Stars are going to be a good team for a very long time. So whether Jason Robertson is there or not and is part of that moving forward, I think they're going to continue to put Wyatt Johnston in a position to succeed. When you've got him on the net front on the power play, you keep putting him in these prime positions. That's why he is getting as many power play goals as he's getting, not just because he's good, but because he's getting the opportunity to score them. And they're going to keep doing that as long as he keeps producing. So I think it's just a matter of when. Could it be next season? I don't know, but maybe the season after. But he's on his way. His trajectory just looks way too promising for him not to become that kind of a player.
Yeah, much to the chagrin of the rest of the Central Division, the Dallas Stars are indeed looking like they're going to be a very good team for a very long time. Of course, if you want to read any more about the Dallas Stars, about Wyatt Johnston, about any of the teams, players, topics we've discussed today here on the show, head over to the Hockey News. It's been the go-to for all things hockey since 1947. 12 issues packed with game and player insights, plus a free issue to start. It's a must-have for any fan. Head to thn.com/free and grab your subscription today. That is going to do it for today's episode of The Wraparound. Thank you so much to everyone who joined us, tuned in, listened to us talking some hockey today. We really do appreciate it. We'll be back with an all-new episode on Thursday, but for now, for Mike Augello and Jim Parsons, I'm Emma Lingan. This is The Wraparound, and we will see you next time.